Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Pollock, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago, reporting. Welcome to another edition of the Goldwater Report. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for tuning in to the Critical Post Chicago. We appreciate it. We're going to dispense with any advertising about the Critical Post. There is a new episode of the Bittersweet Records Radio Hour at the head page. If you care to support us, please go to the head page of the Critical Post and click an ad. We're going to get right to today's opinion and news report in parts of this summary. This is being recorded on the primary day of Super Tuesday, the 1st of March, 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, the recent developments in the primary season have a good portion of the major media corporate conglomerate, socialist press, as well as the fear pornography alternative press and media transfixed in conversations which they discuss amongst themselves on the airwaves, and this ridiculous entertainment product has been showing how irrelevant they've become. Apparently, the American population is pretty tired of their prognostications as their ratings are continuing to slide or stay stagnant. Most of the socialist political speech on these channels has become irrelevant because it appears the population participating in the primary processes for the GOP is telling this contingent of the journalism socialist press and their alternative media fear pornography counterparts in not so polite terms to stick it where the sun doesn't shine. As for the Democrats, small d, the Venona Project confirmed that the Eugene McCarthy movement was in fact correct all along. That being, there was a concerted effort by the former Soviet Union to infiltrate and subvert America from within, much in the same manner that the Council of American Islamic Relations attempts to do in the present day. To be sure, Republican democracy is a messy business. All over the internet, including the fear pornography alternative press, we see folks who are agog at what's transpiring in the GOP presidential nomination. A well-known research analyst we make time to pay attention to has also been proven to be incorrect about a previous prediction concerning the now defunct candidacy of Jeb Bush. Ladies and gentlemen, what is occurring on the airwaves, whether TV, radio, or the internet, is not a serious discussion of the problems facing the American workforce and thereby, though unwitting or unwilling, the American taxpayer. None of the things that matters are being discussed. The only thing that does matter is how much monetary confiscation is being allowed to take place at all levels of the multi-level government and or federalism structure that we all labor under. Ladies and gentlemen, any news outlet that endorses any political party or candidate for any office should be considered for what it is in reality and summarily dismissed out of hand as a propaganda outlet, not objective, and their information is in a very meaningful way weaponized to balkanize special interest groups which span the spectrum, thereby keeping the entire electorate divided and conquered. You, ladies and gentlemen, are divided and conquered over a bunch of meaningless social issues. We'll remind our audience one more time that H.R. 5736, the Smith Modernization Act of 2012, has been put into force. This act, which was included in the 2015 and then again in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act, makes the act of propaganda by the federal government and anyone else who feels like it upon the good people of America a legal reality. We'll remind our audience that before this heinous act was passed, that in fact propaganda by the federal government was illegal. No one in the press except us has reported it. Everyone knows who the frontrunners are. The only thing that matters are the tax implications leveled against the entitlements, and as we all know, this entrenched socialist agenda in place for the last 100+ years will not be thwarted easily or quickly. The critical post's bias is the assertion that any income tax confiscated from the public is an outright immoral, unethical assault on individual private property. The reason for this is clear. In the case of income tax upon individual labor, there is no excise of capital by a wage earner involved in the pursuit of a wage for work. It's an even up quid pro quo barter. Again, there is no capital gain to a wage exchanged for labor or manpower. We've said it before and we'll state it again. Americans, especially the bobbleheads of journalism, alternative and mainstream, are so indoctrinated they rightly don't pay attention to or are distracted to such an extent that their most primary private property, their body and labor, is not their most immediate concern. Rather, it's issues of no importance whatsoever. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, what you regard as press is as dumb as a box of rocks, no matter what level of education they would cite with letters after their names. How could you know what your private property is if these people don't know what their private property is? If you listen to them. Some claim the 16th Amendment to the Constitution has been declared unconstitutional, as if we had a constitution to begin with, or as have never been properly ratified, which is little consideration by the members of Congress, and that's incorrect. They don't pay attention to it, so why should the good people of this country pay attention to it? However, in our view, it's unethical and immoral because income tax lays upon the people and the private corporations under which they work the same principle as living under a king's land allotment. If you live on the king's land, ladies and gentlemen, you have to pay the king's tax. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, Washington, D.C., in its aggregate effect, acts no different than any tyrannical monarch has in days long gone by. With 645 separate corporate agencies making rules nobody can keep track of without any consent of the governed under the federal mantelpiece, where very little value can be perceived as having been achieved in return for the income tax dollar, the amounts of money being collected into the federal government should be considered by the American people as highway robbery, with the private corporations acting as sheriffs and proxies for the IRS mob action henchmen. The good folks in America get very little value from Washington, D.C., and a culture exists wherein the government management policies which have been enacted by Congress creates problems in the general market and then makes acts of Congress to allegedly fix the problems which were created in the first place by the heavy-handed, totalitarian, top-down management of the market by that very same Congress. Any attempts to fix them with other agencies acting as police action, while any congressional oversight as seen through the lenses of the Lois Lerner IRS scandal or Clinton's actions as Secretary of State can attest, is utterly meaningless. In other words, congressional oversight produces little, if any, effect. Everyone knows, but no one seems to know what to do about it. So the wage confiscation continues, and it perpetrates a fraud by the federal government wherein no one is held to account, and so the taxation goes on in ever-increasing levels unabated. Ladies and gentlemen, this anchor's desk has said it before and will repeat it here. Americans have been delivered into the hands of crypto-monopolies and banking, which control everything that matters. The people are balkanized over differences in social mores and left fighting over most things that do not relate to their pocketbooks, and that's the kabuki theater dilemma we face. What we're told means something to us by the propaganda outlets is in fact mostly meaningless drivel. Highly monetized individuals residing in transnational corporations, you'll notice we don't call them by the pop cultural term as elites because there's nothing elite or exceptional about them save for the amount of dollars in their wealth accumulations. Well, they control all the things that do matter, including the money in your wallets and how much of it is left for you to fight for scraps at the table. They control oil and energy products, pharmaceuticals, food production, water supplies, mass media communication companies, armament manufacturers, military operations around the world, rare earth mineral mining operations, banking, and then, of course, there's the federal land grabs recently seen in other news from Oregon and Nevada, which was performed a long time ago and continuing. And you can see the federal land grab and how complete it is out west. Right at the head page of the Critical Post, we have a map of it. It's a double-edged sword, ladies and gentlemen, capitalism, that is. On the one hand, capitalism in industry is and has become necessary, also an uplifting force for people to survive, and has elevated standards of living even for the poorest amongst us, never before seen in history. On the other hand, people in the very same highly monetized positions of these industry sectors have performed their business pursuits too often in mannerisms that are too exploitive and arrogant beyond description. Government oversight has not kept any of this thing in check, not in the least. We shouldn't spend another dime of it or towards it. Their disdain for common folks is on constant arrogant display for all to see. They detest their customers, though in public would feign that their affections are in fact for the very customers we know they loathe as unwashed, unkempt garbage behind closed doors. This dualism of the corporate patina is what has the good folks in America and many other parts of the NATO Alliance coalition world at complete odds and a fever pitch. Let's understand something, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing that will matter after this election season is, and will continue to be, something correctly known as the continuity of government, or, in popular parlance, the status quo, related to the global regime of economic interdependence, which has been in place for quite some time. Nothing that matters will change. There are reports that state China and Russia are making asset purchases within the borders of the American mainland. such as the furtherance of said global regime. And it is occurring at a steady rate. The same is occurring and has occurred with American and NATO alliance-founded transnationals in the opposite direction, especially in China. The necessity of a corporate two-party system to control America's better than a dictatorship could have ever hoped for has been in place for far too long, and we see the results in our daily lives for believing this process actually works in any effective manner for the fascist socialist regime currently in place. Let me repeat that, ladies and gentlemen. The corporate two-party system is a necessity to control and manage the American population for the benefit of the corporatist regime currently in place and partnered in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of contractors, otherwise known as senators and congressmen. Very few Americans know or are paying attention to a process in the congressional budgetary committees known as the allocation process. This is where Congress's discretional spending is taking place and where the pork allotments occur. It was put in place by the Congressional Budget Act of 1974. For a copy of the points of order in congressional budgeting, there will be a link underneath this broadcast submission on the head page of the Critical Post. Of very little interest to the socialist journalism outlets and the fear pornography alternative media is a bill which has not been brought to the floor of Congress for a vote. That bill is H.R. 1591, or the Zero Act of 2015. The acronym stands for Zero-Based Budgeting Ensures Responsible Oversight, which in our opinion, as a title, is the same kind of dumbed-down approach to the condescension that folks inside the Beltway are famous for. Be that as it may, the act came to our attention from the presidential nomination campaign of former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina. For all the socialist bluster coming from all sides of media, none dared cover this most salient point of news. It's being ignored. It's nowhere to be found. Zero-based budgeting means that instead of the present budgeting system known as incremental budgeting, wherein past expenditures are re-included in a new budget plus a percentage of increase to the past expenditures of a government agency, the zero approach brings the budgeting exercise back to zero for the proposed year of expenses and seeks to address the value of each line item of a budget, whether there was any value derived for that line item from the previous year, and whether it should be continued for the next fiscal year cycle. As well, you'll be able to see the text of that act posted under this broadcast submission at the head page of the Critical Post. Also, we have a call into the sponsoring congressman's office for an explanation as to why this has not been addressed. We did that yesterday. We'll report to you how long it took for them to respond to the request for an explanation, which will demonstrate the fact that the good people of America have very sparse interest to elected officials who should only be regarded as franchised partisan contractors for those folks who put them in office in the first place by providing large campaign contributions used for advertising their perfidies and lies to get elected. Instead of this act, H.R. 1591, reaching the floor, what the American people received in response, we surmise, was H.R. 3442, the Debt Management and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2015, which in fact is mere window dressing stating that some specified accounting must occur before the next debt limit by the federal government is reached and thereby increased. Ladies and gentlemen, the trajectory of spending by this and further Congresses is ever more and more spending. It will not be reduced in any meaningful manner ever, not during your lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, we know the information is somewhat dry and it can be boring, but the American public must reach a level of responsibility when it comes to practices of accounting, because that's where the rubber hits the road. It's your money, and it's being confiscated from the workforce to the tune of 35% every week from your paychecks, whether it's unethical or not. It is legal. Moreover, as we've said in the past, if you aggregate your collective tax that you pay at all levels of the system, if you're a homeowner and you have health insurance, which has recently been redefined by the Supreme Court as a tax, your net tax rates approach anywhere from 50 to 65%. That's a lot of money. And then nobody knows what to do about this. There is no way of using an election to reduce this burden. Equally disingenuous is the talk about tax credits and tax reductions, which do not take into consideration the FICA contribution deductions occurring at the rate of 15.35%. So when politicians speak of the terms tax credits, the result of which is a minor amount for most American, tax credits is in effect code talk for not much. It's meaningless. Under the present administration, capital gains taxes have risen from 15 to 28%, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is a large increase, almost double the previous rate. However, the real trouble with the deficit is the fact that nearly half of federal expenditures, according to the Congressional Budget Office, if we can rely on their data, comes in the form of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid payment. As a result of these practices of socialism, the American people have been snookered into a position they can't get out of. Once the federal government takes FICA and Medicare contributions from the American people, the Americans expect to get it back at some future date if they live that long. It's a catch-22, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the nightmare that FDR's administration has created, and every single administration since then has continued. Income taxes had really not kicked into high gear until the late 40s. For approximately 70 years, the assault on private property by the IRS, coupled with the inflationary effects of an expanded money supply, has left the people of America largely fighting for scraps to put in their savings accounts. These effects will continue. The continuity of government is all that matters to the folks in Washington, D.C. There is no president that is going to change a darn thing, and there's nothing in the legislative processes of Capitol Hill that's going to change as a result of any presidency or Congress. It's an act, a big theatrical production which is meaningless. Everyone who's conscious knows it. I talk to people every day from all walks of life, high and low. Nobody knows what to do about it. When I ask them questions about whether they understand that their private property is their labor, and I ask them who died and made these people king, many of them look at me with a blank expression on their face. In a future broadcast, we'll address an initiative for an Article 5 convention, where it started and what path it seems to be taking. And we're going to tell you about the vote of no confidence. So stay tuned for that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for this report. Again, this is Scott Pollack, Chief Editor of the Critical Post, Chicago, reporting. Thanks for watching another edition of the Goldwater Report on this Super Tuesday, March 1st, 2016. That is all.